It is the early morning of August 7th, 1985. On a quiet, isolated farm in the English countryside, police are about to enter a house where something has gone terribly wrong. This case involves a real and violent crime. The details are disturbing. Inside White House Farm, they find 5 members of the same family, deceased. In an upstairs bedroom lies the body of 28-year-old Sheila Caffell, a former model. Next to her, a Bible is open to Psalm 51, the prayer of a sinner. In her hands, a .22 caliber rifle. To the police, and soon to the press, the story seemed to write itself. A beautiful but troubled young woman, in the grip of a psychotic breakdown, massacres her entire family before turning the gun on herself. It was a convenient, if tragic, explanation. It was a story the world would believe, for a time. But you are about to see that this case is not that simple. As the weeks turn into months, a different narrative will begin to surface. A story of greed, manipulation, and a darkness far more calculated than madness. This is the story of the White House Farm murders, an investigation where, even decades later, the truth remains fiercely debated. Our story begins not with the crime, but with the family at its center. Neville Bamber was born on June 8, 1924. He was a man of his time, a former Royal Air Force pilot, respected in his community, who served as a local magistrate in Witham, Essex. His wife, June, born just a year earlier in 1924, was a woman defined by her faith. She was intensely religious, a devout follower of the Presbyterian Church who saw God's hand in everything. In 1949, Neville and June married and moved to a handsome Georgian-style farmhouse called White House Farm. It was set in the quiet village of Tolshunt Darcy, surrounded by 300 acres of Essex farmland. It was the image of pastoral English life. But the house itself had a history. Years before the Bambers arrived, a previous resident had drowned himself in a water tank in the cellar. His own father had also died by suicide on the property, by ingesting rat poison. These were just unsettling footnotes to a house that was supposed to be a happy home. For June Bamber, it wasn't. Her most desperate wish after marrying Neville was to have children, but month after month, year after year, she could not conceive. In the world she inhabited, this was more than a private sadness. It was a public failure, and in her deeply religious mind, a divine punishment. The weight of this perceived judgment crushed her. June's anguish spiraled into a religious obsession. She began a frantic search of her own soul, looking for the sin that had earned her this curse from God. Had she been disrespectful to her father? Had she not helped her mother enough? Her bedroom transformed into a private chapel, filled with icons. For hours a day, she would kneel in prayer, begging for a forgiveness she felt she didn't deserve. By 1955, her mental state had deteriorated so profoundly that she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, diagnosed with severe depression and psychosis. When June was released from the hospital, she and Neville made a decision. If God would not grant them a child, they would find one themselves. They decided to adopt. It would be another 2 years before a child came to White House Farm. The baby girl who would become Sheila Bamber was born into a world of secrets. Her biological mother was a 17-year-old named Christina, the daughter of a highly respected Anglican clergyman, Reverend Canon Eric Caughey. In 1953, the Reverend had played a key role in the televised coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. But just 4 years later, his family was facing a scandal. His teenage daughter was pregnant. To protect the family name, Christina was sent away. On July 18, 1957, she gave birth to a girl she named Phyllis. Just 2 weeks later, Phyllis was handed over to a Church of England adoption society. It was her own grandfather, the Reverend Caughey, who chose Neville and June Bamber to be her new parents. He knew Neville from their service together in the Royal Air Force during the war, and he knew they were a deeply religious family. On October 10, 1957, baby Phyllis was renamed Sheila. She left the children's home and was brought to White House Farm. But the arrival of a child didn't bring June the peace she craved. Her religious obsessions only deepened. By 1958, just 1 year after Sheila's adoption, June's condition had worsened to the point of a second hospitalization. This time, the treatment was not just medication. Records show she was subjected to electroconvulsive therapy, electroshock treatment. During this period, the infant Sheila was cared for by her grandmother and a nanny. A few years later, life on the farm had found a fragile stability. Neville and June decided to adopt again. In 1961, they brought home a 6-month-old boy they named Jeremy. Like Sheila, Jeremy was also the product of a secret affair, the son of a vicar's daughter and a married army sergeant, given up for adoption to avoid scandal. Unbeknownst to him for many years, his biological parents would later marry and have other children. The Bamber family was now complete. 2 adopted children brought in to fill the silence in a house haunted by their mother's faith and sorrow. Neville and June Bamber devoted themselves to their son and daughter. Neville was a kind, steady presence, a big, strong man, described by those who knew him as a bear with a warm smile. He taught the children about the farm, about physical work. They adored him. June was a different kind of parent. She was strict, controlling, and saw it as her duty to immerse her children in her own fervent faith. Both parents, however, believed strongly in the value of a good education. Sheila and Jeremy were sent to private preparatory schools. Then, at the age of 9, in 1970, Jeremy was sent to Gresham School in Norfolk, one of the most prestigious boarding schools in the country. It was there, far from the farm, that other students somehow discovered he was adopted. He became an outcast. For years, he felt isolated and alone. Sheila faced problems of a different kind. At school, she was popular. But back at White House Farm, life was an ordeal. She was growing into a strikingly beautiful young woman, and to her mentally fragile mother, her beauty was not a gift, but a curse. June believed beauty attracted sin. She saw the world in stark terms of black and white, good and evil. A child's normal journey of self-discovery, with all its mistakes and uncertainties, was something June couldn't comprehend. In her eyes, Sheila was often a devil's child. For the smallest misstep, she would be called wicked, her very nature questioned. This constant condemnation from her mother left a deep scar. It fueled a powerful longing in Sheila to one day find the biological mother she had never known. The bond that should have been there was replaced by judgment, setting the stage for a conflict that would define Sheila's life. At 16, Sheila saw her chance to escape. She left school and enrolled in a secretarial college in London, putting distance between herself and the suffocating piety of White House Farm. She began working as a model. It was during this time, in a crowded London pub, that she met Sheila Caffell, a 21-year-old art student. For both of them, it was immediate. Colin would later describe it as absolute love at first sight, saying Sheila was a stunning beauty with the largest, most arresting blue-gray eyes he had ever seen. She filled him with hope. In 1974, when Sheila was just 17, she became pregnant. The Bambers intervened. They arranged for an abortion. For June, this was all the proof she needed. Her daughter was corrupt, spoiled, and living in sin. The event shattered what was left of Sheila's relationship with her mother. Despite the family's disapproval, Sheila and Colin continued to live together in London. She trained as a hairdresser and took modeling jobs, including a 2-month contract in Tokyo. She became pregnant again, and in May of 1977, she and Colin married. But 6 months into the pregnancy, she suffered a miscarriage. Her father, Neville, always more sympathetic, tried to help. He bought the young couple a flat in Hampstead, hoping a stable home would help his daughter recover. But Sheila's pain was profound. A third pregnancy also ended in a miscarriage. You can almost feel her resolve breaking. After years of being told she was bad by her mother, Sheila started to believe it. She began to see the losses as a form of divine punishment, a confirmation of her own unworthiness. After 4 agonizing months of hospital bed rest, on June 22, 1979, Sheila finally gave birth to 2 healthy babies, twin boys, Daniel and Nicholas. But the joy was short-lived. The years of trauma and loss had fractured her relationship with Colin. He accused her of being unfaithful, while he himself had begun an affair while she was in the hospital on bed rest. The final break came at Sheila's own birthday party. In front of all their friends, Colin walked out with another woman. The public humiliation sent Sheila into a rage. She was hospitalized after furiously punching windows with her bare hands, cutting her arms. In May of 1982, the couple divorced. Colin moved on, but remained a devoted father. He and Sheila, despite the bitter end, managed to stay friends for the sake of their sons. Neville again stepped in, providing Sheila and the twins with a smaller flat in Maida Vale, London. But the following years were a torment. Sheila's depression deepened. The once promising model took on low-paying work. For a time, she worked at a London restaurant where the waitresses served dinner dressed in schoolgirl uniforms. She posed for nude photographs. Her emotional state grew more fragile. She began to drink heavily and use drugs. She was seen in the company of much older men, earning her the cruel nickname Bamber. Her despair manifested in frightening outbursts. She would bang her head against walls. Colin, alarmed by her behavior, began taking the twins for longer and longer periods. Finally, in 1983, her family doctor referred her to a psychiatrist, the very same one, Dr. Hugh Ferguson, who had treated her mother, June, years before. His report described Sheila as agitated, paranoid, and psychotic. She was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where she was formally diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a serious condition with symptoms of both schizophrenia and a mood disorder. She was discharged with a prescription for powerful antipsychotic medication. The official narrative of the mad daughter was now set in medical stone. While Sheila's life was coming apart in London, her brother Jeremy seemed to be living a charmed existence. He was the golden son. After finishing his prestigious schooling, Neville had paid for him to travel the world. He went to Australia to complete a scuba diving course, then on to New Zealand, living a life of freedom and adventure far from the tensions of White House Farm. In 1982, Jeremy returned to England. He began working on the family farm, drawing a comfortable salary paid directly by his father. Neville was generous with his son. He provided Jeremy with a cottage of his own, located about 4 miles from the main farmhouse. He gave him a car to use. And, significantly, he gave him an 8% share in the family's lucrative company. Jeremy Bamber was 24 years old. He had position, he had money, and he had the unwavering support of his father. He stood to inherit a significant fortune. While his sister was spiraling, consumed by illness and despair, Jeremy was being carefully positioned as the heir to the Bamber estate. And on that quiet farm in Essex, all the pieces were now in place for the tragedy that was to come. While Jeremy managed a caravan park company, he was also cultivating marijuana on his property and had begun an affair with a married woman with 3 children, a situation that deeply upset June. But, to his parents' relief, Jeremy Bamber eventually ended what June called that improper affair and began dating a new woman, a college student named Julie Mugford. She was a blonde, attending Goldsmiths College and working as a part-time barmaid. By 1985, the couple were planning to get married. But as Jeremy's life seemed to be stabilizing, his sister's was falling apart. In March of 1985, Sheila was hospitalized again following a psychotic episode. During this break from reality, she believed she was communicating directly with God. a painful, obsessive idea took hold, that she was possessed by the devil, and that she could project this evil onto other people. She was certain she would corrupt her own children, that they would become evil. She called them the devil's children, the same phrase June had once used about Sheila herself. She confessed to her doctors that she believed she was capable of killing her children. She also spoke of suicide. This time, Dr. Ferguson revised his diagnosis. He now believed she was suffering from schizophrenia. Sheila was discharged after 4 weeks. As treatment, she was given a monthly injection of Haldol, a powerful antipsychotic drug with a strong sedative effect. From that point on, the twins began to spend most of their time living with their father, Colin. In his 1994 book, Sheila Caffell wrote that Sheila's mental health seemed to decline most sharply after visiting her family, and especially after spending time with her mother, June. Then, in May of 1985, a moment of profound hope. Sheila finally had the chance to meet the woman who gave birth to her, Christine. They had been writing to each other for several years, and they spent most of a day together. Christine explained that she had never wanted to give Sheila up, but she had loved her own father and felt she had to do what was expected of her. Colin described the meeting as one of the most important events in his ex-wife's life. "I will never forget the expression of pure joy on Sheila's face," he wrote. "She was beaming from ear to ear with a smile I hadn't seen since the twins were born. There was an instant rapport between them." Sheila told Colin that Christine was everything she had ever dreamed of, and that now, with this new support, everything would be different. Everything would be much, much better. On Sunday, August 4th, 1985, Colin drove Sheila and the boys to White House Farm. They were to spend a week with Neville and June. After that week, Colin planned to pick up Nicholas and Daniel and take them on holiday to Norway. But the boys did not want to stay at the farm. They didn't just dislike their grandmother, they were afraid of her. The twins complained that she forced them to pray all the time, even while they were brushing their teeth. In his book, Colin recalled Daniel once pointing a finger to the sky and saying, "I think Granny loves him up there too much, even more than us." In one of the later crime scene photographs, a chilling detail is visible, carved into the paint of a cupboard door in the bedroom where the twins slept. Someone had scratched the words, "I hate this place." A neighbor saw Sheila on the sunny day before the tragedy and noticed nothing unusual. 2 farm workers saw her the next day with the children and said she smiled a lot. Jeremy visited the farm on the evening of Tuesday, August 6th. A farmhand heard Jeremy leaving at around 9:30 at night. Around that same time, Barbara Wilson, the farm's secretary, called Neville. She got the distinct impression that she had interrupted an argument. She said Neville was sharp with her, even hanging up in irritation, something he had never done before. He was known as a calm and even-tempered man. June's sister, Pamela Boutflower, called around 10 at night. She spoke first with Sheila, who she said was quiet, and then with June, who sounded perfectly calm. For a few hours, silence fell over White House Farm. Then you have to imagine the scene. It is 3:26 in the morning on August 7th. In the quiet of his own cottage, miles away from the main house, Jeremy Bamber picks up the phone and dials the local police station in Chelmsford. He tells the duty officer that he has just received a frantic phone call from his father. His father said Sheila had gone crazy, that she had a gun. And then, Jeremy told the officer, the line from White House Farm had gone dead. Jeremy added a crucial detail. His sister Sheila suffered from mental illness. He said she could be dangerous. The police were dispatched immediately. Jeremy also drove to White House Farm, just after the police, but 3 of the responding officers would later testify that he was driving much more slowly than they were. They overtook his car, arriving at the farmhouse 1 or 2 minutes before him. By 4 in the morning, 2 officers, with a 3rd remaining in the car, joined Jeremy and made their way across the long garden towards the house. That's when one of the officers saw it, a shadow moving in one of the windows. Someone was walking around inside the house. Fearing an active shooter situation, the officers decided not to enter. They called for backup. All three of them took cover in the bushes, watching the house. But now, there was no more movement. A terrible silence had descended. The tactical firearms unit didn't arrive until 5 in the morning, a full hour and a half after the initial call. The decision was made to wait until dawn before attempting to enter the house. Using a megaphone, the police tried to make contact with Sheila. All this time, one of the police constables was talking with Jeremy, who, according to the officer's report, seemed quite calm. Jeremy told the officer that he and his sister didn't get along, that she was not herself and was receiving treatment. He also informed the police that Sheila was familiar with firearms and that they had gone shooting together at targets. When the officer asked why he had called the local police station instead of 999 for emergency services, Jeremy said he didn't think it would affect how quickly they arrived. He said he had never been in a situation like this before. And the reason he was driving so slowly? He was simply afraid. "Everything will be all right, won't it?" he asked the officer. "Yes," the constable replied. Police had established that all the doors and windows of the house were secure, locked from the inside. All except for one small window in the downstairs toilet. At 7:54 in the morning, police finally entered the farmhouse, breaking in through the back kitchen door. The door had been bolted from the inside. The key was still in the lock. This next section of the story details the discovery of a real and violent crime. Viewer discretion is advised. The first body they found was in the kitchen. It was Neville Bamber. He was dressed in his pajamas and was lying on the floor next to an overturned chair. He had been shot 8 times. 6 of those shots were to his head, fired while the rifle was just inches from his skin. The other shots to his body were fired from a distance of at least 5 feet. Based on where the empty shell casings were found, police concluded that the attack on him had started upstairs. He had managed to make his way down, where a violent struggle had clearly taken place. A lampshade was broken. Sugar was spilled. Plates were smashed. A chair was overturned. The telephone receiver lay on a kitchen counter, off its hook, next to more empty casings. A later examination of Neville's body would reveal bruises on his cheeks and linear bruises on his right forearm. There were more bruises on his left wrist and forearm, as if he had been beaten with the butt of the rifle. The entire floor was covered in blood. But this was only the beginning of the horror at White House Farm. The complete silence that now filled the house promised nothing good. Terrible discoveries awaited them in every room. Making their way up the stairs to the second floor, police saw a long corridor with a row of open doors on either side. The boys were found in the children's bedroom, shot in their beds. Daniel was holding a finger in his mouth, his head turned to one side. He appeared to have been shot in his sleep. He had been shot 5 times. Nicholas had been shot 3 times. It seemed Nicholas had woken up and looked at his killer. All 3 of his wounds were to his face. All the shots were either contact wounds or fired from extremely close range. June's body was in the master bedroom, lying on the floor near the door. She was wearing a nightgown that was heavily stained with blood. She had been shot 7 times. One of the shots was to her forehead, directly between the eyes. 5 of the shots were fired while the rifle was about 30 centimeters, or 1 foot, away from her body. The shot between her eyes was fired from the same distance. They found Sheila on the floor of that same master bedroom, near her mother. She was also in a nightgown. She had 2 gunshot wounds to her neck. The pathologist, Dr. Peter Venezis, who would later become a professor of forensic medicine at the University of Glasgow, stated that the lower of the 2 wounds was inflicted from a distance of about 3 inches. The upper wound was a contact wound. That upper wound would have killed her instantly. The lower wound would also have been fatal, but not necessarily right away. He even believed a person with such an injury could have stood up and walked. But the pattern of bloodstains on her nightgown indicated that she had not moved, that both shots were fired while she was seated. Dr. Venezis concluded that the lower, non-fatal wound was inflicted first because it caused internal bleeding in the neck that would not have occurred to the same extent if the instantly fatal wound had come first. The rifle, without a silencer or scope, was lying on her chest, the muzzle pointing up towards her neck. Her right hand was resting lightly on it. June's Bible lay on the floor next to Sheila, its cover touching her right hand. The book was found open to pages 656 and 657. It was open to Psalms 51 and 55. These passages were later interpreted by a theologian, Dr. Gillingham of Worcester College, Oxford. He concluded, "In this case, Psalm 51 could not be more appropriate. It is full of the fear of God's punishment, the need for repentance, and the need to make some extraordinary, broken sacrifice to atone for one's guilt. Psalm 51 can be called the prayer of a sinner, that is, one who feels he has committed a great evil and therefore asks God for forgiveness." Overall, the Psalms reflected a desire to cleanse or wash away evil deeds. The details reflect a belief that God will deliver a person from sin after death. This Bible was normally kept in the nightstand by Sheila's bed. The investigation immediately noted that it was impossible to say for sure if she had shot herself or if she had been shot by someone else. The order in which the family had been killed was unknown. In total, 25 shots had been fired, most at close range. One of the officers went back outside to find Jeremy. He had been ordered to wait by the police cars with the other officers who remained outside. "We've found them all. They're all dead," the officer announced. According to police reports, Jeremy immediately became hysterical. He had trouble breathing. He repeated, "You promised everything would be all right." He began to lose consciousness. The arriving paramedics took him by the arms, sat him down, and told him to breathe deeply. Jeremy kept repeating, "Where's my father? Let him come out to me." The man had collapsed into a state of deep, traumatic shock. From that moment, the investigation locked onto a single theory: murder-suicide. Detective Chief Inspector Thomas Taft Jones was certain that Sheila had killed her family. From the very beginning, the police had determined their point of view and refused to deviate from it. The evidence seemed clear. They found the .22 caliber rifle in Sheila's hands. The house had been locked from the inside. Jeremy had reported the phone call from his father asking for help, claiming Sheila had gone mad and had a gun. And Jeremy himself appeared utterly devastated when he was told the news. The motive for Sheila's rampage, police believed, was an unpleasant conversation with her parents the night before. A conversation witnessed by Jeremy and several farm workers. During dinner, the family had discussed placing the boys in temporary foster care because Sheila was not coping and Colin worked too much. June had apparently called Sheila a bad mother, but Sheila, oddly, had not reacted. Detective Jones learned that Sheila had been discharged from a hospital in March after treatment for a psychotic episode. He found a note in Neville's desk, written by Sheila Caffell after Sheila's release. In it, Colin expressed grave fears for the health, safety, and stability of the boys when they were with their mother. "We all know," he wrote, "that Sheila lives in her own little world and hardly notices anything beyond her own thoughts." The police also learned that Neville kept several guns at the farm. By all accounts, he was something of a collector, loved his guns, and often cleaned them in the evenings. Most of his collection was kept in a special gun cabinet, which was not locked. On November 30th, 1984, he had purchased the very semi-automatic .22 caliber rifle found at the scene, along with a silencer and 500 rounds of ammunition. The rifle, with its silencer and telescopic sight attached, was normally used for shooting rabbits. The scope could be removed with a screwdriver, but was usually left on because resighting it took a lot of time. Jeremy told them that on August 6th, he had loaded the rifle thinking he heard rabbits outside, but he never used it. He said he left the rifle on the kitchen table with a full magazine and a box of cartridges before he went home. At that moment, he insisted, it had no silencer and no telescopic sight attached. In the mind of Detective Chief Inspector Thomas Taft Jones, the case had resolved itself with tragic simplicity. Jeremy Bamber's testimony about the rifle, combined with the scene inside, painted a clear picture. And because the lead detective was certain, the press became certain too. On August 8, 1985, just one day after the killings, the Daily Express ran a headline that would shape the public's understanding for weeks to come. It read, "Farmer's family killed in a bloody massacre." The story described a crazed, divorced model, Sheila Caffell, aged 28, who had taken a rifle from her father's collection, shot her 6-year-old twin sons, then her father as he tried to call for help, then her mother, before finally turning the weapon on herself. The photograph accompanying these articles was no longer from a fashion magazine. It was the face of an alleged mass murderer. This neat, horrifying narrative settled over the case like a shroud. But not everyone was convinced. 3 days after the murders, some of Neville Bamber's extended family, his cousins David and Robert Boutflower, arranged a meeting with DCI Jones. They told him their Sheila, the Sheila they knew, could not have been the killer. They described her as hopelessly uncoordinated, inexperienced with firearms. Poor Sheila couldn't pour a cup of tea without spilling it, they insisted. They believed there was a far more likely culprit, one with a clear motive, Jeremy Bamber, who stood to inherit the entire family fortune. But their version of events made no sense to DCI Jones. His own certainty was his anchor. After all, he reasoned, movement had been seen inside the farmhouse while Jeremy and the police waited outside. The police's own radio logs stated that a firearms team had spoken to someone inside the house at 5:25 in the morning. For the detective, and for the newspapers that reported it in the following days, the case was open and shut. This unwavering conviction, however, would have a devastating consequence. Because the police were so sure, the investigation was never properly conducted. The certainty of the initial investigators led to a cascade of errors that would haunt this case for decades. For 1 full month, the clothes Jeremy Bamber was wearing on the night of the murders were never collected or examined for evidence. Within days, the bodies of Neville, June, and Sheila were cremated, and all of the original blood samples were destroyed, making future analysis impossible. The crime scene itself, White House Farm, was not secured or meticulously inspected. Crucial evidence was either overlooked or simply not preserved. Just a couple of days after the discovery, police officers oversaw the burning of blood-soaked bedding, mattresses, and carpets. And only 3 days after his entire immediate family was killed, Jeremy Bamber was handed back the keys to the farmhouse. He was now in control of the crime scene. But not every officer shared the DCI's confidence. Sergeant Stan Jones, no relation to his superior, was troubled. He kept returning to a single, glaring question. What kind of suicide victim shoots themselves twice? This question opened the door to others. You start to look at the details, and the official story begins to fray. How, for instance, did the slightly built Sheila Caffell manage to overpower her own father? Neville Bamber was 6'4" tall. That's 193 centimeters. And even at 61 years old, he was in excellent physical condition. He was a working farmer. The post-mortem showed he hadn't just been shot, he had been violently assaulted. There were long lacerations on his head, consistent with being bludgeoned with the butt of the rifle. There had been a desperate struggle in the kitchen. And yet, according to the pathologist's report, Sheila's body showed no signs of having been in a fight. Her hands were clean. Her nails were neat and unbroken. Her fingertips were free of blood, dirt, or the telltale gunpowder residue you'd expect from handling ammunition. The rifle's magazine had been reloaded at least once during the killings, a process that almost always leaves grease and metallic traces on the hands. There was nothing. Her bare feet had no blood on them, nor any of the sugar that had been spilled on the kitchen floor downstairs. An autopsy did find small traces of lead on her hands, but the levels were nowhere near high enough to be consistent with her having fired the rifle 25 times. The questions were piling up, and the answers were only becoming more obscure. While police were closing their files, the Bamber family was opening doors. 3 days after the killings, several of Neville's relatives, including his cousin David Boutflower and the executor of his will, Basil Cock, visited the farm. They were there to look for documents, but they found something else. In the downstairs office, inside a gun cupboard that police had supposedly searched on the day of the murders, David Boutflower found the rifle's sound moderator, the silencer. With it was the telescopic sight. As they examined the silencer, they noticed something odd. The surface of the metal was scratched and damaged. On the end, there appeared to be a smear of red paint and a trace of what looked like blood. They also found a single strand of gray hair caught in one of the parts. The family immediately reported this to the police. It took another 3 days, until August 12th, for officers to finally come and collect this crucial piece of evidence. By the time the silencer arrived at the Forensic Science Service, the gray hair had been lost. Undeterred, the family returned to the farmhouse themselves, determined to find the source of that red paint. Their search led them to the kitchen. There, on the underside of the red-painted wooden mantelpiece above the Aga cooker, they found it. Fresh damage, a scrape mark that seemed to match the size and shape of the silencer. On August 14th, forensic experts finally took a sample of the paint from the mantelpiece. Analysis showed it contained the exact same 15 layers of paint and varnish as the chip flaking off the silencer. On October 1st, casts were made of the marks, and they were officially deemed consistent with the silencer having struck the mantelpiece during a violent struggle. The blood found on the silencer was tested. It was blood group A, the same as Sheila, but also the same as her parents, Neville and June. In 1985, DNA testing was not yet available for forensic use. However, a more detailed analysis identified the presence of a specific enzyme, AK1. The prosecution would later argue that this was definitive proof the blood belonged to Sheila. This small, damaged metal tube, overlooked by police but found by a grieving family, was about to become the single most important piece of physical evidence in the trial to come. On August 16, 1985, the funerals for Neville, June, Sheila, Daniel, and Nicholas Bamber were held. Jeremy was pictured weeping, physically supported by his girlfriend, Julie Mugford. He looked like a man utterly destroyed by grief. But his behavior in the days that followed told a very different story. Just a few days after burying his entire family, Jeremy was seen at a local Caribbean restaurant, treating a group of friends to dinner and champagne. Shortly after, he and Julie took a trip to Amsterdam. His actions seemed so far removed from that of a mourning son and brother that the rest of the Bamber family became absolutely convinced he was responsible for the murders. The police, meanwhile, were struggling to contain the damage from their initial mistakes. By September 7th, it seemed the case was destined to become a quiet embarrassment, a tragic murder-suicide file tainted by a botched investigation. But then, something happened that made a quiet resolution impossible. Julie Mugford walked into a police station. Julie had been Jeremy's staunchest supporter. She had corroborated his alibi, telling police on the day after the murders that he had called her from his cottage at around 3:30 in the morning, sounding worried and saying, "Something is wrong at home." But her loyalty to Jeremy shattered on September 3rd, 1985. An old female friend of Jeremy's called him, and right in front of Julie, he invited the other woman on a date. A furious argument erupted. She threw something at him, hit him. He twisted her arm behind her back. 4 days later, she went to the police and changed her statement. In her second explosive interview, Julie painted a horrifying new picture of the man she had been planning to marry. She said he spoke with contempt about his family, his old father, his crazy mother, and his hysterical sister. The twin boys, he complained, were unbalanced and irritated him. He constantly complained that his parents were restricting his money, that he hated them all. Julie told police that Jeremy had even hatched a plan to get rid of them. He had considered drugging them and then setting the farmhouse on fire, using Sheila as the perfect scapegoat. He only abandoned the arson plan, he allegedly said, because he didn't want to destroy the farm's valuable contents. The stage was now set for the most damning testimony of all. Julie Mugford's story grew more detailed, more specific. She claimed Jeremy had discussed with her how he could get into the farmhouse undetected through a specific downstairs window with a broken latch. He had also figured out how to exit through another window, pulling it shut from the outside with enough force to re-engage the latch. This wasn't theoretical. According to Julie, on the weekend before the murders, Jeremy's mood had darkened. He allegedly called her at 9:50 at night on the night of August 6th, just hours before the killings, to say he had been thinking about the crime all day, that he was furious, and that it's tonight or never. A few hours later, at around 3:30 in the morning, he called her again. This time, his message was chillingly brief. "Everything is going well," he reportedly said. "I've been up all night. Bye, darling. I love you very much." After the murders, when they were alone, she said he boasted, "I should have been an actor." When she pressed him, asking if he did it, he denied it, but said a friend of his had. He claimed to have told this friend exactly how to get in and out of the house. He'd even instructed the friend to call him from a phone inside the farmhouse, one with a last number redial feature, to create a fake call log that would support his alibi if police checked. The plan went off perfectly, he allegedly told her, with one exception. His father, Neville, had put up a fight. The friend had gotten angry and shot Neville 8 times. He said he had ordered Sheila to sit down before shooting her last, placing the Bible next to her to suggest a religious frenzy. Julie also told police that Jeremy had paid this friend £2,000 for the job. Based on this one statement from a spurned girlfriend, the entire investigation was turned on its head. On September 8, 1985, Jeremy Bamber was arrested. As he was being taken into custody, he was recorded as saying, "I don't believe this is happening. I am not guilty." The alleged hitman, a friend of Jeremy's, was also arrested, but he had a rock-solid alibi for the night of the murders and was quickly released. Jeremy insisted Julie was lying, fabricating the story because he had ended their relationship. He admitted that while his parents gave him money, it was never enough, but maintained that he loved them. He also correctly stated that he had seen their will, which divided the estate equally between him and Sheila. For some investigators, including DCI Jones, Julie's story was still suspect. But how could she have known about the window with the broken latch? Jeremy had an answer for that. He confessed that he and Julie had used that very window to break into the farmhouse before, to steal money from his parents. This explained Julie's knowledge, but it did so by painting him as a thief who preyed on his own family. After 5 days in custody, the police were forced to admit they had no concrete evidence linking him to the murders. They charged him only with the burglary he had just confessed to and released him on bail. Under police surveillance, Jeremy's behavior became even more erratic. He went to a bar, then a fashionable strip club. He attempted to sell 20 nude photographs of his late sister Sheila to the Sun newspaper for £20,000. Then he flew to Saint-Tropez with a friend. By now, Detective Superintendent Mike Ainsley had taken over the case. When Jeremy Bamber flew back into the UK on September 29th, he was immediately rearrested and this time, charged with 5 counts of murder. The trial of Jeremy Bamber began on October 3, 1986, at Chelmsford Crown Court. It would last for 18 days. Presiding was Mr. Justice Drake, and before him sat a jury of 7 men and 5 women. They were faced with a decision that is highly unusual in a British court. They were not just deciding guilt or innocence, but were being asked to choose between 2 potential killers. Was it Jeremy, or was it Sheila? The defense, led by Jeffrey Rivlin QC, argued that Sheila Caffell had suffered a sudden, severe psychotic episode. In this state, she shot her family. They claimed that afterwards, in a moment of ritualistic clarity, she removed the silencer, placed it back in the gun cupboard, changed her clothes, and washed herself thoroughly before turning the gun on herself. They pointed out that no one saw Jeremy cycle to the farm that night. There was no forensic evidence on his body or clothes linking him to the violent struggle. The reason he didn't race to the farm after his father's call, they argued, was simple. He was afraid. The prosecution, led by Ed Lawson, presented a narrative driven by 2 powerful motives: hatred and greed. They claimed Jeremy left White House Farm around 10 at night on August 6th after dinner. Later that night, he returned, not by car, but on his mother's bicycle, which he had borrowed days earlier, taking a route that avoided main roads. He approached the house from the rear, entered through the damaged window, and took the rifle with the silencer attached. According to the prosecution's timeline, he went upstairs and shot his sleeping nephews first. Their brother Nicholas woke and was shot in the hallway. He then encountered Neville, who had run from his bedroom. A struggle ensued, with Jeremy retreating down the stairs while firing at his father. The fight ended in the kitchen, where Neville was finally overcome. With the men dead, the women waited in terror. In the main bedroom, Jeremy shot his mother, June. He then ordered Sheila to sit on the floor by her parents' bed and shot her twice. The prosecution argued he then staged the scene to frame her. Realizing she couldn't have reached the trigger with the long silencer attached, he removed it and put it back in the cupboard. He placed the Bible by her body, took the kitchen phone off the hook, and left through the window, pulling it shut behind him. He cycled home, and at 3:26 in the morning, he called the police. This was the story the jury now had to believe, or reject. The silencer, then, was central to the prosecution's case. It was deemed to have been on the rifle when Sheila was shot because of the blood found inside, though there was never any direct forensic proof that this blood belonged to Sheila. With the silencer attached, the rifle was simply too long. It would have been physically impossible for Sheila to reach the trigger. Her arms were not long enough. And if she had discovered she couldn't shoot herself with it attached, you'd expect the silencer to be found next to her body. She would have had no reason to go and put it back in the gun cupboard. Besides, who shoots themselves twice? The prosecution argued that Sheila had expressed no recent suicidal thoughts. She wasn't interested in firearms and knew little about them. She didn't have the physical strength to overpower her 6'4" father, Neville, and there was no evidence on her body to suggest she had moved around the crime scene or been involved in a struggle. On October 28, 1986, after more than 9 hours of deliberation, the jury found Jeremy Bamber guilty by a majority verdict of 10-2. The minimum required for a conviction in the UK. He was sentenced to 5 concurrent life terms. The judge told Jeremy, "Your conduct in the planning and carrying out of the killing of 5 members of your own family was evil, almost beyond belief." As the verdict was read, Jeremy Bamber showed no reaction. He simply swayed slightly in his seat and then froze. Jeremy Bamber was sent to a high-security prison. He has protested his innocence every single day since, and for 40 years, this case has refused to close. Because here's the thing. If the story ended with a guilty verdict, this would be a simple case. It isn't. What makes White House Farm one of the most argued-over cases in British history is that almost everything about the investigation was a mess, and the people who argue Bamber is innocent have some genuinely uncomfortable questions. So let's go through them honestly. Not as a defense lawyer, not as a prosecutor, just as someone who wants to know what actually holds up. Let's start with what is not in dispute, because it matters. Essex police made serious mistakes. The crime scene was overrun. Dozens of officers walked through the house while the bodies were still in place. Bedding and carpets were burned within days. The bodies were cremated and the original blood samples destroyed. Jeremy was handed back the keys to the crime scene 3 days after his family died. And in 1996, Essex police destroyed most of the physical exhibits, despite a standing court order to preserve them. The officer responsible said he simply hadn't known the case was still live. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is the documented record. And in 2023, the police watchdog ruled that Essex police had breached its statutory duty by failing to refer 29 serious complaints about how senior officers handled this case. So when Bamber supporters say the investigation was a shambles, they are on solid ground. The question is whether a botched investigation means the wrong man is in prison. Those are not the same thing. So let's take the strongest arguments his campaign makes, one by one, and then let's look at what the courts said when they examined them. The first is the silencer. This is the heart of the entire case. The prosecution argued the silencer was on the rifle when Sheila was shot, and with it attached, the weapon was simply too long. Her arms could not have reached the trigger. That single fact is what turns a suicide into a murder. And the silencer was found in a cupboard, meaning someone else put it there. Someone alive. But the silencer was not found by police. It was found by Bamber's own cousins 3 days after the murders, in a cupboard the police had supposedly already searched. Those same cousins stood to inherit the estate if Jeremy was convicted, and they did inherit it. Bamber's supporters say that is a glaring conflict of interest that the jury never properly heard about, and they have a point worth taking seriously. Then came the DNA. In 2001, new testing on the silencer became possible, and the Criminal Cases Review Commission sent the case back to the Court of Appeal because the blood inside the silencer was the pillar the conviction rested on. The defense argued the new tests showed the main DNA component was not Sheila's. It appeared to match her mother, June. Here is what the court actually concluded, and this part is usually left out. The judges found that June's DNA was in the silencer, that Sheila's DNA may also have been in it, and that there was DNA from at least one male. Their ruling was that the results were complex, incomplete, and ultimately meaningless, because they did not explain how June's DNA got there, did not prove Sheila's was absent, and did not make the conviction unsafe. In December 2002, the Court of Appeal upheld the conviction. The second argument is the number of wounds. Sheila was shot twice in the neck. Bamber's campaign points to something genuinely strange. Several of the first officers on the scene, including a superintendent, a police surgeon, and a coroner's officer, recorded seeing a single wound. 2 shots, they argue, is almost impossible in a suicide. And if the early witnesses only saw 1, something changed. The counter-argument is simple, and it comes from the pathologist. A first shot that is not immediately fatal can be followed by a second. It is rare. It is not impossible. And a wound in a bloodied neck can be missed by an officer glancing at a body in a dim room when he is not conducting an examination. The third argument is the phone calls. Bamber's team says a call was logged from inside the farmhouse while he was standing outside with the police, which, if true, would mean someone was alive in that house and he could not have been the killer. This is the newest and most serious line of argument, raised again in recent years, and it is the one his lawyers are still pressing. And the fourth is Julie Mugford, the ex-girlfriend whose testimony effectively convicted him. She only came forward after he dumped her. She was paid £25,000 by a newspaper for her story after the trial. Bamber has always said she invented the confession out of revenge. Any honest look at this case has to admit that a scorned ex-partner who later profits from her testimony is not an ideal witness. So those are the arguments. Now here is the other half of the picture, the part the campaign videos rarely show you. The jury heard the case for 18 days and convicted him. Not unanimously, 10-2. Since then, Jeremy Bamber has taken this case to the Court of Appeal, which upheld the conviction in 2002. He has applied to the Criminal Cases Review Commission repeatedly. They refused to refer his case in 2004. They refused again in 2012, stating they had found no new evidence or legal argument capable of raising a real possibility that his conviction would be overturned. He sought judicial review of that decision, and the High Court refused it. In 2025, the Commission reviewed 4 more of his grounds for appeal, and again declined to send them to the Court of Appeal. That is 40 years of scrutiny by every level of the British justice system, including bodies whose entire purpose is to catch wrongful convictions. And every single one of them has looked at these arguments and left the conviction standing. And then there is the evidence that has never gone away: the paint. Flecks of red paint on the silencer that matched, layer for layer, the 15 layers of paint on the kitchen mantelpiece, where a violent struggle took place. Blood inside the silencer, which means it was on the rifle when someone was shot. And the simple, brutal logic that no one has ever answered. If Sheila shot herself, who put the silencer back in the cupboard? There is the money. Jeremy stood to inherit a substantial estate. His mother's will was worth around £230,000, and his father's around £380,000, well over £1 million in today's money. The court also heard that Jeremy had been telling people his mother wanted to change her will to bypass him entirely and leave everything to Sheila's twins. And there is his behavior. Days after burying 5 members of his family, he was seen buying champagne for friends at a restaurant. He flew to Amsterdam. He tried to sell nude photographs of his dead sister to a newspaper for £20,000. He went to a strip club while under police surveillance. None of that is proof of murder. But the entire rest of the Bamber family, the people who knew him, watched him do it and became convinced he had killed them all. They have never wavered. So what do we actually have? We have a man convicted by a jury and confirmed guilty by every appeal body in the country over 4 decades. We have an investigation so badly run that the police watchdog itself has condemned it. We have a silencer that shouldn't have been in that cupboard, and a family with a financial interest who found it. We have a witness with a motive to lie and a check from a newspaper. And we have 5 people dead, including 2 6-year-old boys who never woke up. Somewhere in that mess is the truth. The courts have looked at it over and over, and every time they have said the same thing: the conviction stands. But the questions have not gone away, and they probably never will. Here's what I keep coming back to. A bad investigation doesn't automatically mean an innocent man. But it does mean we may never be certain. And in a case with 5 bodies, certainty is exactly what the victims deserved. What do you think? After everything you've just heard, does the conviction hold up for you or not? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If you want cases like this told straight, the strongest arguments on both sides, no agenda, subscribe. That's what this channel is for.